Breaking. Russia's winter warfare intensifies. Civilians pay the ultimate price. 4 more lives lost. That's the grim toll from Russia's overnight bombardment of the central Cherkasy region. But this is just the latest chapter in what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling a telling crime, a pattern of deliberate escalation that's transforming winter itself into a weapon of war. Let me be clear about what we're witnessing here. This isn't just another military operation. This is a calculated strategy to break the will of an entire population by making survival itself a daily struggle. And the evidence? It's written in the frozen tears of grandmothers who can't keep their grandchildren warm, in the bodies of miners who never made it home, and in the ice sheets covering apartment buildings across Kyiv. Yesterday's attack was particularly brutal, and it demands our attention. A bus carrying miners in the Dnipropetrovsk region became the target of Russian drones. Think about that for a moment. Not a military convoy, not a weapons depot, a civilian bus full of working people. 12 people killed instantly. At least 16 others wounded, their lives hanging in the balance as I speak to you now. These weren't soldiers on a battlefield. These were miners, fathers, sons, brothers, heading to their shifts, trying to earn a living, trying to survive another day in a war that's already stretched into its 4th year. President Zelensky didn't mince words in his response. He laid the responsibility squarely at Russia's feet, pointing to this attack as clear, undeniable evidence of Moscow's strategy of deliberate escalation, or a telling crime, he called it. And he's right, because this isn't about military objectives anymore. This is about terror. This is about sending a message that no one is safe, nowhere is protected, and normal life is no longer possible. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Amid the violence and the frozen despair, there's a diplomatic opening. Zelensky announced new U.S. brokered talks between Ukraine and Russia, set to begin Wednesday in Abu Dhabi. 2 days of negotiations in the gleaming towers of the UAE, while back home, Ukrainians huddle around hot stew for warmth. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Will these talks lead anywhere? After 4 years of broken promises and shattered ceasefires, can we dare to hope? That remains to be seen. But let me tell you what's happening on the ground right now, because the statistics and diplomatic statements don't capture the human reality of what we're witnessing. We're in the grip of an extreme cold snap that's pushing temperatures below -20 Celsius in parts of Ukraine. To put that in perspective, that's colder than the inside of most freezers. That's the kind of cold that can kill you if you're not careful. That's the kind of cold that makes every breath hurt, that makes your fingers go numb in minutes, that turns simple tasks like getting water or going to the bathroom into dangerous expeditions. Emergency crews are racing against time, desperately trying to restore heating and electricity to millions of homes. Millions. Let that sink in. We're talking about entire cities, entire regions without the most basic necessities of modern life. Why? Because Russia has systematically, then methodically, deliberately targeted Ukraine's power grid, turning what should be basic infrastructure into a battlefield. This isn't collateral damage. This is the strategy. Make winter the ally that Russia's military hasn't been able to become. Our correspondent Sarah Rainford is on the ground in Kyiv, and what she's witnessing is nothing short of a humanitarian crisis unfolding in slow motion. And I want to emphasize that word, slow, because this isn't a sudden disaster. This is a grinding, relentless erosion of human dignity and safety that's been building for months. Picture this scene. Hundreds of tower blocks across Kyiv with no heating whatsoever. These aren't small buildings. These are massive Soviet-era apartment complexes, home to thousands of families. People are lining up in the freezing cold for scoops of hot stew, not because they're hungry, but because it's the only warmth they'll feel all day. The steam rising from those bowls represents more than food. It represents hope, community, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Their homes, the places that should offer shelter and comfort, are as cold as the streets outside. Some residents tell us it's actually warmer outside during the day because at least the sun provides some heat. Russia has attacked Ukraine's power plants repeatedly, wave after wave of missile strikes, and now winter itself has become their accomplice in this war. I spoke with residents who are living through conditions most of us in the West can't begin to imagine. One person told me, matter-of-factly, that they're sleeping at the local school because nighttime temperatures are dropping to -20. They said it casually, as if sleeping away from home in a school gymnasium is just another adaptation, another adjustment in a war full of adjustments. Another woman described sleeping in the same clothes she wears during the day, layers upon layers of sweaters, coats, everything she owns just to make it through the night. I hope to God we get the heating back, she said, and you could hear the exhaustion in her voice. Not just physical exhaustion, but the soul deep weariness of someone who has been in survival mode for too long. 4 years of all-out war have hardened these people. They've adapted to air raid sirens, to food shortages, to the constant threat of violence. But even they admit this winter is testing their limits in ways that artillery fire and drone strikes haven't. The human body can endure a lot, but extreme cold is relentless. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't take breaks. It just slowly saps your strength, your warmth, your will to continue. Yet their spirit, remarkably, impossibly unbroken. When I asked what Russia hopes to achieve with this winter warfare, one resident named Vieira was defiant. Her response deserves to be heard in full. They won't get what they want. We're stronger than Russia. In any case, when the siren sounds for an air raid, no one even moves anymore. Think about that statement. Air raid sirens, the sound that should send everyone running for shelter, have become so routine that people don't even react. That's not apathy. That's adaptation. That's what happens when survival becomes your default mode. The danger, however, is constant and very real. This isn't just psychological warfare. Drone attacks have left soot stains on apartment walls, physical evidence of strikes that could have killed families while they slept. One woman, Elle Miller, told me something that captures the complexity of this crisis perfectly. She says she's ashamed to live on handouts, to rely on charity for basic warmth and food. Her pride is wounded, but she's angry too, and that anger is directed exactly where it should be. We thought we would get the power back, but there is nothing. Just the cold, she said. Then she added something raw and brutally honest, the kind of thing people say when they've been pushed to their absolute limit. I don't want to say this, but I wish they would freeze in Russia too. Let Putin freeze like us. That sentiment, that desperate wish for those inflicting suffering to understand suffering, tells you everything about where we are right now. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about fundamental human needs and the rage that builds when those needs are weaponized against you. On the other side of Kyiv, the situation is equally dire, and in some ways even more visually shocking. Pipes burst this morning in one building, and here's where the extreme nature of these conditions becomes crystal clear. The water froze in massive sheets down the entire front of the block. I'm not talking about icicles hanging from gutters. I'm not talking about a frozen puddle. I'm talking about frozen waterfalls. Sheets of ice cascading down 8 stories of an apartment building, water that burst from pipes and froze before it could even hit the ground. The temperature when our crew was there, minus 12 degrees Celsius, and that's during the day. At night, it gets worse. With no power and no elevator, residents face a dark climb up flights of stairs. Imagine that for a moment. You're 70 years old. You live on the 8th floor. There's no light in the stairwell. Every step is a challenge, and when you finally reach your apartment, exhausted and out of breath, it's not warm. There's no reward for that climb, just more cold. Elena lives on that 8th floor. Her apartment flooded a week ago when the pipes first burst, and there's no way to dry anything out without heat. Her carpets are soaked. Her furniture is ruined, and she's desperate in a way that's painful to witness. I don't understand what we're going to do if we don't get the heating back. People are freezing. There are lots of small children here, and pensioners with nowhere to go. She's not just worried about herself. She's worried about her neighbors, about the vulnerable people in her building who might not survive this winter if things don't change. Here's what makes this situation even more psychologically cruel. Russia paused its strikes for a few days recently. A brief respite. A temporary ceasefire, or so it seemed. For those few days, people dared to hope. Repair crews worked around the clock. Families started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd have heat restored before the worst of winter arrived. But that hope was a trap. That truce is over now. The bombardment has resumed with renewed intensity, and Ukrainians know with grim certainty that this winter could still get worse. That brief pause wasn't mercy. It was just another form of cruelty, giving people hope and then snatching it away. This isn't just about infrastructure damage or military strategy. Let's call this what it is. This is about using cold as a weapon of war. This is about making life so unbearable, so impossible, so filled with daily suffering that people break, that they flee, that they give up. But here's what Russia hasn't counted on, what they've consistently underestimated for 4 years: the resilience of ordinary Ukrainians who refuse to surrender their dignity, even when their own government can't guarantee them heat, even when international support feels distant and abstract, even when the future looks impossibly dark. As diplomatic talks prepare to begin in Abu Dhabi on Wednesday, the question looms larger than ever. Can negotiations succeed where 4 years of war have failed? Can diplomats in climate-controlled conference rooms find solutions for people who are literally freezing to death? And more urgently, how many more civilians will pay the price while we wait for an answer? How many more miners will die on their way to work? How many more children will go to bed shivering? How many more elderly people will face the terrible choice between buying food or buying fuel they can't even use because the power is out? From the frozen streets of Kyiv to the drone-struck regions of Dnipro, from the Cherkasy region where 4 more died last night, to every dark, cold apartment across this embattled nation, our Ukraine endures. But the cost of that endurance is measured in lives lost, in children shivering in unheated schools, in elderly pensioners with nowhere to turn, in the slow erosion of the social fabric that holds a society together. This is Sarah Rainford, reporting for BBC News from Kyiv, and this is the reality of Russia's winter war. A war where the battlefield is every home, every street, every frozen pipe and darkened stairwell. This is what it looks like when a nation weaponizes winter itself. And this is what resilience looks like when people refuse to break, even when everything around them is breaking. The talks begin Wednesday. The cold continues tonight.